Hey, everybody, welcome to the Trailblazers podcast. We are Tyler and Dave, and today on the show, we want to talk a little bit about the Pomodoro Technique, which is a productivity technique that is really useful for, say, anybody who's working from home or doing any type of creative, productive management work. And this work will help you hit the flow state more easily for your work and help you get more done in a day's worth, which everybody here is definitely wanting to do. We talked about this a little bit in a previous video when we were talking about the makers and the managers schedule with Paul Graham. If you do want to take a quick listen to that, we're going to link it in the show right here. And within that video, for myself, I'm more on a maker schedule. And I think Tyler's a little bit more on a manager schedule or has been more on a manager schedule previously. So we found this article to be really interesting. And for me as a maker, one technique that I've used in about the last 3 or 4 years to kind of really boost my work productivity has been the Pomodoro Technique. Now, what is the Pomodoro Technique, you're probably asking me? Is basically it's a way to split up your time between when you're focusing on tasks and when you're giving yourself a little bit of break room or rest room to kind of recover your mental state. So how the work portion goes is basically you typically work in, say, 25-minute segments, and you want to focus on one specific type of task within that 25-minute segment. So for an example, for me, it might be, say, like a particular bug or ticket or code problem that I'm trying to solve within the 25 minutes. After the 25 minutes finishes, what I typically do is I'll take a 5-minute break. And during that time, I might go do a variety of different things. It might be I'm quickly stretching, or maybe grabbing a quick snack, or utilizing the washer, making a cup of coffee, etc. And then what I'm doing is I'm coming back after that 5 minutes and continuing to work on a specific task during that next 25 minutes. And how some people utilize it as well is they'll take a longer break after the fourth interval of 25 minutes at a time. And that's kind of a nice way to sort of reward yourself for really productive, say almost 2 hours of work, and then giving yourself enough time to recharge and recuperate at that point. So you might be asking now, Dave, okay, you've told me all these things about the Pomodoro Technique, sounds great. Why and how is it useful? So why is the Pomodoro Technique useful, you might ask me? Pretty much why it's useful is that it helps you hit the flow state in your work. And what you'll sort of realize is something like this, at least in my case. I don't feel like I'm really focused on something until I spent about 15 to 20 minutes on that particular task. And what I find is previously to using the Pomodoro Technique, I might be a little bit distracted or not mentally focused on a particular task at that particular point in time. However, once I spend the time of 20 minutes or so in the Pomodoro Technique, is I feel super focused on that task that I'm trying to execute at that particular point in time. And then what I realize after I'm doing about my second or third Pomodoro, after taking my breaks, I'm really focused. I don't feel very distracted, and I feel like I can get a lot done in a shorter period of time. And I kind of think this is a large productivity hack in some senses. And if you can kind of start to utilize it a little bit in your schedule, I'm sure you're going to see or start reaping the rewards from utilizing this. Tyler, what are your thoughts on the Pomodoro Technique? And I know you've utilized it a little bit more, so I'd be curious to kind of hear any benefits that you've gotten from it too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one benefit you get from this is kind of like you were touching on, is that it gives you an extremely effective way to get into a flow state, and that's exactly what you want to get your deep work done. So I think the time I used this the most actually was when I was in university and I had to study for exams. This is an extremely effective strategy for studying for exams, and it's something, if you can get good at it in university, you can carry that into your career, because there's a lot of things you work on day to day where this can be highly effective as well. And I think even 25 minutes and 5 minutes is pretty optimal for most people, but there's a lot of different ways you can do this as long as you're consistent and your body adapts to it. So I know I've utilized a 50-minute work schedule and a 10-minute break, right? I've done that before too, and that also works. You can't stretch it too long, but you can kind of play around with the amount of time and really find what works for you. I think the thing that goes unappreciated about the Pomodoro Technique is it matters a lot what you do with that break time, right? A lot of people think that this is about maximizing the time of effectiveness of the work time, which is true, but it's going to make a huge difference what you do with that 5-minute break. So Dave mentioned a lot of really good low bandwidth self-care things that you do in those 5 minutes in order to get you ready for the next 25 minutes. So it's something that isn't forcing your brain to switch context. So you're building this night, like Dave was saying, it takes you 15, 20 minutes to get into that flow state. You don't want to ruin that by switching context and like being on your phone or doing something where you're inputting a lot of information and stuff like that, then you have to work to do that all over again. So yeah, something like making a coffee, having a stretch, going for a walk, something like that is going to be the most important thing. And this is really the same thing as like for anybody that plays sports or goes to the gym, it's your rest days that actually contribute the most to your performance in the gym when you go back, right? Like the gym part comes easy. You go in there, you lift and everything. The work part comes easy. You do your 25 minutes, you know exactly what you got to do. It's structured. You get into it. It's that 5 minutes, that rest time that kind of matters how the next 25 minutes is going to go. So it's an incredibly effective technique, and it's good for blocking out distractions. And I feel like that's the number one thing. It's not like a lot of hacks these days are about the increase of productivity, where what's more effective a lot of times is kind of just like the decrease of distraction. And that's what the Pomodoro technique really gives you with that 25 minutes. Is like, I'm just focusing on this. I don't have my phone by me. I'm not talking to anybody. It's just, this is the time for work. And then that 5 minutes, you're resetting for the next one. So I would encourage everybody, if you haven't used it yet, just try it. And it might be a little bit difficult at first because it is hard to, like, if you're not used to that level of focus for that amount of time, and short interval breaks, and really bounding out your mental capacity in terms of minutes, it can be difficult to get into. But give it enough time, give it like a week, 2 weeks, something like that, and then see where you're at. And I think a lot of people will realize that their productivity has gone up a lot. So it's something I've utilized with success in the past, something I continue to try and utilize when I can. And I feel like more so when it ingrains more and more, you less like count the time and set a timer. You just understand the principle of, like, you get in a nice flow state and then you come out of it and you just reset for the next one. And you build a reflex for your body doing that. But you start with training with the Pomodoro technique. And so that's why it's been so effective, and it's so highly coveted by so many people that are known to be highly productive people. So I've had an extremely positive experience with it. I'd encourage everybody else to use it. And Dave, do you have any other comments for the Pomodoro technique?
Yeah, I think Tyler, kind of the way that you're summarizing it is perfect. And I think one thing too that Tyler mentioned that I really like as well, and we'll probably talk about this later in a later video too, is during that break time, trying to do things that are like almost self-care-ish, not trying to change the context too much of what you're working on, right? And so I think one thing Tyler pointed out is really important is, say, like, not going into your phone and utilizing like super like high bandwidth kind of activities. I mean, maybe a good example would be at like lunchtime, you can go through your phone and kind of check like what has been happening to your day at like this point in time. And, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future, maybe in like distraction, how to reduce the amount of distractions during your workday to kind of increase your productivity and get as much high quality work done in a workday or in the day of studying. So with that being said, thank you guys for listening. As always, I really appreciate your support. If you really like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and as well, a sub is always very highly appreciated. And we will see you guys next time. Thank you.
Catch you next time, everybody.